So I'd like to now turn it over to Matt Devino. Matt is the Senior Director of Advocacy and Strategic Alliances at PhRMA. As I'm sure you know, PhRMA advocates for public policies that encourage the discovery of important new medicines for patients. Matt specializes in policy and strategy in many areas to include Medicare Parts B and D, and specifically the Inflation Reduction Act implementation. Matt's well-versed in oncology. Prior to joining PhRMA, Matt led federal policy and advocacy for ACCC. So with that, I'd like to welcome Matt to the stage.
Nice pump-up music here. Thank you for that. Thank you all for having me and allowing me to close out the conversation today. I appreciate the presentations that came before for sort of laying out, especially the framework for the IRA, so that we can go a little bit deeper into what we see as the concerns and potential solutions, at least from an industry standpoint, and moving forward, both on the legislative side of things and the regulatory and guidance-making side of things. Just quickly about me, as Chris mentioned, I've been with PhRMA now going on my third year, was previously in the community oncology space and working with many of your practice leaders, oncologists, via ACCC, had the opportunity to challenge the most favored nation drug pricing model and legislation that ultimately held up that model. It may come around again, so we are prepared. We know what that playbook looks like. And I cut my teeth doing provider reimbursement and practice economics with the Medical Group Management Association prior. So this stuff is fun for me. What's not fun for me is the IRA. I think every single person that went before used the term unintended consequences to describe this incredibly complex law that made sweeping changes to the Medicare program in a way that we haven't seen since the ACA or even the passage of the creation of Medicare Part D. I think the term unintended consequences is a generous term. I think a lot of the creation of this statute was done behind closed doors in a very political exercise without bipartisan conversation that might have pressure tested some of the seemingly arbitrary choices in the legislation that lead to the barriers that we're seeing now that I'll go into in just a moment. So I wanted to break my conversation into three parts. The first largely focused on innovation and the impact of the law on small molecule research in particular. I think we've started to hear why the law disadvantages small molecules compared to large and biologic drugs. I also wanted to talk about the patient access piece of this and Part D specifically, given that is the first place that drugs have been selected for quote-unquote negotiation under this price-setting program. And we have seen and will see sooner than on the Part B side what the actual access impacts for patients look like there. And then finally, this is something that both Sarah and Nick talked about. There is a pretty drastic impact to provider reimbursement once those Part B drugs start to be price set. So to start with innovation, I want to broadly just set the stage of why small molecule medicines are crucially important. You guys as physicians and researchers and people who are conducting clinical research know better than me, I'm sure, but these are accessible medicines that are able to come in accessible forms like pills, capsules, patches, syrups, things that patients can go to a pharmacy and pick up and take home, things that they can have mail ordered and sent to their house. It sort of alleviates any sort of travel burdens, economic burdens a lot of the time to accessing these types of medicines. From a more scientific point of view, small molecules are capable of reaching targets inside of the cell. Large molecules and biologics generally bind to things on the outside of the cell. They're too large to actually penetrate a cell wall. So it's the small molecules that actually go in and are able to bind to things like tumor suppressors and protein kinases and the things that really prevent a cancer gene from being expressed. They also help with adherence just because of the convenience of access, generally lower out-of-pocket costs, and they can also help reduce health disparities, largely because in comparison to biologics, which would require travel to a physician's office, to a hospital, to an infusion center in order to be infused with those medicines. With all that being said, the IRA creates what we call, and you've heard several folks now refer to as the pill penalty. How many folks in the room have heard this term prior to today? Just Dr. McEnany. And Chris, you reviewed my slide. Of course. It is a lesser known piece of what we have been advocating for just because it is newer. I know if I stood up here and played you PBM ads with the guy in the blue suit marching around and stealing your rebates and not passing them along to the patients, you would know exactly who that guy is. But pill penalty is new, so that's why it's important for us to be talking about it today. And essentially what that means is small molecule medicines are disadvantaged when it comes to price negotiations because they're eligible for selection 4 years prior than their large molecule counterparts. And so how this is playing out, and sort of pharma as a voice of our member companies, we represent more than 30 large pharmaceutical manufacturers based in the US and with a global presence. Immediately following the passage of the IRA, we surveyed those members, and 63% of them said that the IRA would impact their R&D investment focus away from small molecule medicines. And 82% or more of them with pipeline projects in a variety of therapeutic areas, but inclusive of cancer, thought that the IRA would have a, quote, substantial impact on R&D decisions in these areas. So a little bit, we have to shift and respond to the policy environment that is now in front of us. And unfortunately, the way this is set up, the government is putting its finger on the scale and saying these type of drugs are worth more than these type of drugs. Put your investment here. And so that is, in effect, what we've started to see. Research from Vital Transformation has started to model out truly what the impact of the IRA on biopharma investment looks like since the law's passage. The orange line is the line that indicates small molecule investment, and the blue line is large molecule biologic investment. You can see that both lines took a pretty significant dip right when the IRA passed. I think there was a tremendous amount of uncertainty around that time. The biologics kind of investment has rebounded since then, but the small molecule investment has continued to deteriorate. And this type of graph is also represented if we look at new clinical trial starts. You see much the same trend. And so they found that small molecule funding has actually dropped by 70% since September 2021. That's when Build Back Better Act, which was sort of the precursor of the IRA, started to be talked about in a major way, and the industry was even responsive to that at that point, knowing that it was such a politically important piece of legislation to President Biden and the likelihood of that passing, which it did. And even through the first 7 months of 2024, we now see biologic funding is now 10 times larger than that of small molecules, which is shocking. So not only does this sort of threaten research into new potential small molecule assets, but I think the larger and maybe more concerning impact is the threat to post-approval innovation in R&D. So as several folks have talked about, small molecule drugs are eligible for price setting 7 years after their first FDA approval. That price will go into effect at year 9. So this research by far actually tried to demonstrate how many post-approval indications in cancer medicine specifically come after that 7-year period. And we found that 40% of post-approval indications were new disease targets, typically different for different cancer types and subtypes. 50 were for new age groups or other populations. 17% were for earlier intervention in the progression of cancer. So all tremendously important innovations. However, 41% of those overall occurred 7 or more years after a medicine's initial FDA approval. So that is sort of what we stand to lose should the law be left in place as it is. Not saying that none of that research will continue, but it is a very difficult decision for companies and for investors, VCs. There are a lot of players here in the game that are ensuring that when they invest in an asset, that they have the ability to have a return on that investment, given the exorbitant cost of getting a drug from research through clinical trials. I think we have additional sort of specifics here on post-approval R&D for blood cancer medicines. This is particularly important now as we see the newest list of 15 drugs selected for price negotiations. 2 of them are actually blood cancer medicines. And so, the story for post-approval R&D and heme is very much the same as we see in oncology overall. In heme, 57% of all approved uses came after the original approved indication. I think cancer is one of the most compelling stories for post-approval indication. I think at PhRMA we are not disease specific, but we look for examples across a variety of therapeutic areas. And it is the cancer drugs by far that have more indications than if you were to look at a cardiovascular drug or a neuro drug. I have lots of materials I'm happy to share with you afterwards that kind of show this more eloquently than I'm saying it. But it's really a shocking reality when we think that a lot of this post-approval research may no longer have an incentive behind it to continue. I will also say, just as an example, at ASCO earlier this spring, PhRMA convened several CEOs of the member companies there that were commenting on the IRA and the impact of the drug price negotiation program. I know you all are familiar with the drug Keytruda. Rob Davis, the CEO of Merck, was present and told all of the reporters in the room, because of the IRA, we'll never have another Keytruda for as long as this remains in effect. It just doesn't economically make sense. That's a drug with over 20 indications. Many came, the vast majority, 7 years beyond its selection date. So I think it's really real and it's impactful to share those stories. For our industry folks, it's really uncomfortable to share stories like that because of the potential impact on your stock prices, your boards that they're accountable to. But we need to be able to start having these conversations and making this feel more tangible, because while these decisions are being made now, we won't feel the effects of them for 10 to 15 years just because research does take so long. But I guess that's sort of an impassioned ask to you to eliminate this sort of pill penalty. So PhRMA and many of our member organizations have been working closely with Congress to introduce legislation that would equalize that time frame in terms of pricing between small and large molecules, to make them on the same playing field at 11 years post-FDA approval, which biologics currently are. That piece of legislation is called the Ensuring Pathways to Innovative Cures Act, or EPIC Act. It has a great name. I think if we could pass it, it would be EPIC. I think that there is, between this and the Orphan Cures Act that I know was mentioned earlier, there is a lot of impassioned patient communities that are getting behind this and helping to support them. We are currently working with those communities to ensure that this bill gets reintroduced this Congress. Our goal is to ensure that it happens in a bipartisan way. I do think that because of the current makeup of Congress, it has become another path towards passage is frankly reconciliation. So because there is unified Republican control in Congress, there is a special means by which they can pass legislation with a simple majority in the House and the Senate. And it is possible that this piece of legislation would be able to be included in a reconciliation package, much in the way that the original IRA was passed back in 2022 via reconciliation. So as the political winds change, there are become new opportunities, and I don't think that this is going to be the last time you hear about this issue, particularly as PhRMA and many of our members try to drum up support for this fix, which frankly is a 2-sentence fix. The bill itself is literally 2 sentences. It's the simplest bill I've ever read. So take that for what you will. Yes? It was introduced in the previous Congress last January in the House only, and we're working with those same co-sponsors to reintroduce in the House again this year. It has not been introduced in the new Congress. So changing gears a little bit away from innovation, I did want to spend a little bit of time talking about patient access in Part D specifically, because that is where the drugs that have been selected to date and had MFPs set already, that first 10, are covered. And largely, research is showing that IRA is likely to hurt patient access in Part D via narrower formularies, via more utilization management that will lead to non-medical switching. Because of the Part D redesign and the shift in the way that plan liability works, the change in rebate structures, it is incredibly likely that plans will apply more utilization management to drugs in the Part D program. So more prior authorizations, more step therapy. It's the potential for moving drugs to higher cost tiers. These are all things that are pretty uniformly expected by folks who are much smarter than me and model this stuff out. At the same time, payers are saying that, the IRA, the payers themselves have said this when they've been surveyed. Like, they've made it very clear that because of their liability, they need to put other things in place that essentially prevent patients from getting drugs in a timely fashion. And they came out and said this in a survey. And so it's also kind of frustrating because in that same survey, they said that CMS as a negotiating body wouldn't get a bigger discount than they're already capable of negotiating in the private market. CMS is not meant to be a negotiator. In fact, we would argue very strongly that this isn't a negotiation. So in any case, the payers say that they can do it better, but they're going to put a lot of barriers in the way to prevent patients from getting their drugs in the meantime. And I think just in general, we also believe that the IRA puts at risk patient access to multiple different therapeutic options. There is a requirement that MFP drugs be covered on formulary. So once they have a government price, they need to be covered. But there's no guarantee where on the formulary they can fall. There's the therapeutic alternatives, they only need to cover one. They don't need to cover a plethora of alternatives on the same plan. And so we are going to see those formularies get narrower and patients have less choice, and therefore their prescribers have less choice into what medicines that patients are able to get. I think one thing that sort of hits home as well is that the negotiation program is intended to save money for the Medicare program and not for the patient. We really don't expect, and I think Nick had this on one of his slides, an incredibly minuscule percentage of Medicare Part D beneficiaries will actually see a reduced out-of-pocket cost as a result of this negotiation. When we looked at the first 10 drugs that were selected for negotiation, of those that were non-specialty medications, they were a vast majority of the time already on the lowest formulary tier, the lowest copay possible. So even if Medicare is negotiating a lower price, the patient cost doesn't change at all, and the government is just pocketing the difference. For the specialty medicines that are more likely covered by coinsurance and therefore a percentage of that medicine, sure, negotiating a lower price would help, but what we found was that what helps more is the out-of-pocket cap. So those patients that would have been paying less via coinsurance for a negotiated high-cost drug are going to hit their out-of-pocket cap anyway. So it sort of negotiates the benefit of, it negates the benefits of quote-unquote negotiation. But I won't be all negative about this. I do want to highlight one positive of the Part D redesign. I think specifically the Medicare prescription payment plan. You might have heard this referred to as smoothing. This allows patients to spread the cost of their drugs out across the calendar year. It is available to all Part D beneficiaries, but they need to opt into the program by contacting their health plan. And so we imagine that patients most likely to benefit from this are those that had high out-of-pocket costs in the previous plan year, largely that are receiving treatment for complex medical conditions like cancer. I think CMS came up with its rhetoric and qualifications for who is quote-unquote likely to benefit from this program, and I believe they thought that the threshold should be $600 a month or $600 in a visit to the pharmacy that you would benefit from this. I think we as an industry feel that should be a bit lower. More patients should be eligible, or any patient's eligible, but I think more should be receiving education about this program because there hasn't been nearly enough yet just to let patients know that this exists. So this is another item where I have great one-pagers that give you information on how to opt patients in. Go ahead. Mm-hmm. That's great to hear. That's awesome. It is a new program, so as you continue to hear, you yourself on the dispensing side, or if you hear from patients about this program, please let your industry folks know because we are monitoring and we do want this program to be successful because we do know that attrition due to high out-of-pocket costs on treatments is a big concern. So yeah, again, I do have materials and I'm happy to share them and how you can help educate your patients on this program. So I'd like to close in talking about the provider reimbursement impact. I don't have the scary slides that Sarah had with the big, $19 billion figure and potential cuts to add-on payments, but that is the reason that we're talking about this, and that is a scary number, and it's a reason why everyone here should engage in advocacy up on the Hill to address this issue. So to go into some specifics around the provider payment cut, it's not only that, it's all the administrative burdens that go along with the quote-unquote back-end effectuation of the MFP. It is a funky, funny word, but it is actually really difficult to figure out which patients get it, which patients don't, when you get a rebate, when you don't. And then I think everyone's also, significant concern here is the potential and likely spillover to the commercial market. So as others have mentioned, the IRA under statute requires that selected Part B drugs be reimbursed at a rate of MFP plus 6%, as opposed to the traditional ASP plus 6%. That's where we're seeing the vast majority of the cuts to add-on payments. The other piece of that, though, is the spillover to the commercial market. The MA plans, the commercial plans that reference ASP, there is nothing in statute that prevents those MFPs from flowing into ASP and pulling down that ASP number. And wham bam, Medicare price setting now is also commercial price setting. And that, I think, is also scary to us on the industry side of things. Thankfully, this piece of legislation that has been mentioned was introduced by Senator Barrasso in the Senate and Representatives Burgess and Murphy in the House. The Protecting Patient Access to Cancer and Complex Therapies Act mitigates, quote, some impacts of the IRA. I originally had mitigates the impacts of the IRA, but a lawyer made me change it to some because there are like 7 different definitions of spillover. We can get into that on the panel, I guess. I think that Sarah probably wants to talk about that. No. But this does address, I think, the majority of the most painstaking ones. So first, the bill would allow reimbursement to be returned to ASP plus 6% for selected drugs. It would also exclude MFP from the calculation of ASP, meaning we don't have that effect of the ASP being dragged down in the commercial market. And so this would specifically, place guardrails around that and protect ASP in that way. The other thing here that's also important to note is that beneficiaries should benefit from these quote-unquote negotiations. Their cost sharing should go down if we're able to negotiate lower prices with the federal government. And so the nice thing about Barasso is it allows their cost sharing to still be based on the MFP. So they're going to be paying less, and then that means industry would then pay more back to the federal government in the form of a rebate. And so that was kind of the first bullet here, is allowing this to structure the MFP as a refund and a retrospective rebate process, which I think is preferred on the manufacturer side of things, and frankly would probably make things a lot easier as you're operationalizing how to do this in a practice setting. But that's for y'all to figure out in the working sessions that are coming. I think that this is a really important piece of legislation, and I also think that it's going to be important for us to help it to advance in a bipartisan way this Congress. The previous versions of this bill that were introduced last Congress were Republican only, so a lot of the work that PhRMA and COA and a lot of our other provider partners have been doing is to have conversations with Democratic offices to encourage them to get on this bill. There was a lot of reticence ahead of the November elections for any Dems to link arms with Republicans on anything that would touch IRA, given it was President Biden's crowning achievement of his presidency. But I think now that we're beyond that point, a lot of offices are more willing for us to go back in and have this conversation and to support this. At the same time, there are efforts for broader Medicare provider reimbursement reform that's being led in the Senate. There's a working committee of 3 Dems and 3 Republicans in Senate Finance that started last year talking about physician payment reform at a larger scale. I think it's important for this to be part of that conversation. Thankfully, Dr. Barasso is part of that 6-senator group and has been working on Dems to encourage them to embrace this solution. And so, yeah, I guess I will close here by saying legislation isn't also the end-all, be-all. I encourage you, particularly the prescribers in the room, to engage as CMS continues to move forward with this program. The new administration came in and put out a statement very quickly saying that we are going to continue rolling out the Medicare Drug Price Negotiation Program. And so there is currently an open comment period and information collection request that is open through March 1st. It is very technical. Maybe some patient groups will respond. Industry will absolutely respond. But after that point, they are moving forward with a series of listening sessions by therapeutic area and town hall sessions specifically for prescribers to speak directly with CMS and tell them what it means for you and for your patients to be experiencing things like increased utilization management as a result of these drugs being negotiated. And it's really important that we get as many provider voices as possible. In this room would be fantastic, considering that 4 out of the 15 drugs are oncology drugs. And so that's my plea to you all, is to be active in participating in this process. And if you need any guidance and resources on the way there, I know that PhRMA and our industry partners are more than happy to help with that. So I was going to go into questions, but I think we decided we were going to save that for the panel.